My name's Emily MacArthur. I'm a member of Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers, and I'm here today because I know that we can win. I'll be one of your co-MCs today alongside Margaret Elizabeth of the Green Party, and we're just so incredibly excited here to be joined by impressive organizers who have helped build for this event, including the Green Party, Chris Hedges, Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, also known as CAUSE, Do Dissidents, Revolutionary Blackout Network, Status Quo, union members from SEIU, IBU, UAW, and more. And of course, many who are not yet part of an organization, but arrived ready to organize and win. I know we have people in the room today from as far away as Massachusetts and North Carolina. Can people raise their hands if they traveled to come here today? That's impressive. In addition to this room full of people ready to organize and win, we're live streaming this event to thousands of people on several channels across YouTube. This helps us, all of us here, get a head start on what we have to do immediately after this, right? Because this event is just kind of the kickoff for us to go out and continue to build and organize. Like many working class people, just a little bit about me, I've been fighting for my life against rising rents, unattainable health care, climate catastrophe, and I've watched as the Democrats have either feigned helplessness or led the charge on every attack on working people. I'm horrified by the attacks that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their reactionary administration are carrying out on federal workers, on immigrants, on LGBTQ people, not only because I stand in solidarity with oppressed people everywhere, but because history tells us that attacks on vulnerable communities are only a prelude to an assault on the working class as a whole. And if you're here today, I imagine it's because those things resonate with you too. To an extent, we're almost exhausted from hearing all the things that are wrong, right? We know the symptoms. We see the ever-broadening human misery in our everyday lives. A recent statistic that just really hit me was that homelessness amongst adults over 65 is on track to triple by 2030. And we have very clear studies showing that it's the cost of housing and healthcare that's driving this trend. It's unambiguous. Today, that there are 10 times as many so-called natural disasters every year, and we have unambiguous data saying it's climate change fueling that escalation. And of course, I think something that brought many of us into the struggle over the last year is the ongoing horrific atrocities in Gaza that continue to persist despite a ceasefire. Trump is kind of the most honest about the genocidal ambitions to completely remove all Palestinians from Palestine, and this project moves forward despite the overwhelming support for peace. The real question, though, that millions of working class people have, and I think why we're here today, is what will it take to turn the tide? I started by saying that I'm here because I know that we can win, and I feel confident in that fact because I've seen it. I was excited to help found Workers Strike Back in 2023.
If we are serious about turning things around, if we are serious about unionizing Amazon and workplaces across the country, we cannot just tweak the status quo. We need a reckoning.
To build on the strategy that has yielded so many incredible victories, like the Seattle minimum wage that was $15 when we won it and is now over $20 an hour. That was like the Amazon tax, where we taxed Amazon and big business over $250 million per year to fund affordable housing. These are the kinds of transformative victories that are urgently necessary to turn the tide. During those fights, I saw how in a city with no elected Republicans, Democrats played an open role of subservience to big business, obstructing our movements. And when we did force their hands so that they had to vote yes on what we were fighting for, they fought to water down our victories at every single opportunity. The Democratic Party is not an ally to left-wing movements. When Kshama Sawant left office, those same Democrats rapidly moved to water down our $15 an hour minimum wage law last year. They wanted to use inflation as a reason to permanently enshrine a second lower tier among minimum wage workers, as though it's workers and not the bosses who should absorb those costs. It was absolutely shocking. And Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers led the charge in stopping that attack, turning out to City Hall, and stopping it in its tracks. As of January this year, every single Seattle minimum wage worker makes $20.76 an hour. And that's what we're all here today to discuss. How can we continue to build on that fighting strategy that engages the strength of working class and young people? Because we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized, and refuses to make backroom deals with the two parties of the billionaires. How can we fight the rich and their two parties and win? For many of us, we maybe feel like we've been checked into the struggle, we've been out protesting, and it feels sometimes like it's not moving the needle. I think for Workers Strike Back, a core piece of our strategy is clear fighting demands that act as a call to action for working people. And that's why we're bringing, as part of our Fight the Rich campaign, demands like Medicare for All and unionize Amazon front and center today. And we're going to talk more about this Fight the Rich campaign throughout the day. But we know that unionizing Amazon and winning Medicare for All would be transformative for working people. But also, importantly, we know that they're wildly popular. We saw how in Missouri, even though Trump won the popular vote, a $15 an hour minimum wage also passed overwhelmingly, so that these kind of working class victories can cut across the noise of the two parties of big business that seeks to divide us. From people who are totally turned off by electoral politics to those who are organized and fought for the strongest vote for Jill Stein in the last election, many in this room today, and even those who were lured into voting for Trump on the promise that things might actually change for the better, demands like Medicare for All can act as a lightning rod, uniting working class people against our real political enemies, the rich. The full proposed program of demands for Fighting the Rich campaign, and like I said, more speakers are going to get into more detail, but I think it's important for us to start here, is Medicare for All, end the genocide in Gaza, tax Amazon and big business to fund social housing, stop mass deportations, and take big corporations into democratic public ownership. So Workers Strike Back wants to use this organizing conference, and we're working with a broad array of other groups to bring this event together to build an organized fighting force prepared to agree not only on that program, but a strategy to win it. And we're so excited to have you here today.
Logan Swan, I'm a member of Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers, as well as a journeyman iron worker and a longshore casual. So while we're born into our class position, nobody's born a revolutionary. Like everyone, I joined this movement with some confused and backwards politics. Coming of age and entering the workforce during recession, in the absence of political leadership from labor leaders. During that crisis, I drew the conclusion that we don't have jobs because of outsourcing through things like NAFTA and so on. So that if we wanted to see a return of like good union jobs, people like me had to buy union-made, American-made. I didn't get a smartphone until Motorola had one, I think, made in Texas. I bought Union Line jeans, Union House boxer briefs. A Ricker vacuum, a Ricker vacuum made in Missouri. If I couldn't find something made in the U.S., I would hit a thrift store or I'd go without it. And mind you, at the time I was a non-union steelworker. I made $12.40 an hour. I lived in low-income housing. It fucking sucked. So this changed nothing. The ruling class doesn't care about these kinds of individual choices. It wasn't yet clear to me that those good union jobs that people talk about were owed to the legacy of class struggle of the labor movement, and that the degeneration of our condition was due to the class collaboration and the political cowardice of the leaders of our unions. Their cynical pragmatism of accepting the limitations imposed by the Republicans and Democrats, the absolute minimum our employers would concede to in contract negotiations. I started organizing as a socialist at the same time that I began my apprenticeship in the building trades as an iron worker. The experiences of organizing in the successful 15 Now campaign, fighting to tax Amazon to create union jobs, building affordable public-owned housing, were part of my apprenticeship, but unfortunately not as a rank-and-file union member, but as a socialist. I was radicalized and tempered by the society we lived in with all of its contradictions and injustices. So I'm going to focus on Tax Amazon and the lessons from that struggle. We campaigned on legislation to create 10,000 union building trades jobs, not building shiny new stadium or for some billionaire funded by regressive taxes on workers and homeowners, but building public housing for us with a bill paid for by the billionaires. And this wasn't like, we didn't just like have this fully hammered out thing and just go to working people and say, hey, we're doing this, take it or leave it. This is our campaign. We came forward with, with this idea, with this program of taxing big business, addressing the affordable housing crisis through creating union jobs, building affordable housing. And we flyered outside workplaces, we postered, we organized action conferences, and that was where the real decisions were made. None of this was done behind closed doors. The decisions were made through elections of a coordinating committee at the Action Conference, and they were voted on at those Action Conferences. That anyone, if you support this, come out and be a part of this. That's in total contrast to how we see campaigns being run through the establishment or even through the NGOs and even well-meaning people, where they think what's best for people and they come out and say this is support it or not, and if you don't, fuck you. Like no, this was a decision made by people in the community, but with the leadership from socialists, from trade union militants. And it was through that, going and talking to rank-and-file union members and having them organize in their unions and pressuring union leaders to support this, that we got a majority of local unions to endorse it, because we created a thing that could not be ignored, right? But unfortunately, despite the endorsement of the local labor council and the majority of the local unions, the building trades leadership chose to effectively scab on our movement, running defense for Jeff Bezos and the Democrats backing him. My own union's leadership went so far as calling Amazon a, quote, responsible builder that doesn't have, quote, a requirement to pay a prevailing wage, but they do. This servile praise has aged horribly, with Amazon being slapped with fines for union busting, forcing workers to piss in bottles, trapping workers in a warehouse during a tornado, killing 6. Not to mention the testimony from Brother Idolo here from Cause, but it smacks of the majority of labor leaders' race to the bottom strategy of class collaboration, partnering with employers that's seen the conditions of workers, both union and non-union, plummet. And tragically, this bankrupt strategy has only been doubled down upon by the likes of Shawn Fain and Sean O'Brien, who promised to change from the corrupt regimes leading UAW and the Teamsters, only to continue the policy of cowardice of their predecessors as they suck up to the Trump administration and champion the tariffs of, the America First. Shawn Fain is supporting Trump's xenophobic tariffs on imported goods, while Sean O'Brien has gone so far as to speak in favor of right-to-work union busting, saying he'll collaborate on union busting state by state. What may work for one doesn't work for the other. Who's to know? Yeah, fucking boo. Absolutely fucking shameful. And that he was put forward, people have real confidence put in this guy that he was going to change things. And it's a shocking betrayal, and he should not be left off the hook by it. The left, the union activists cannot let these guys off the hook. So much like the building trades leader here ran cover for the Democrats and Jeff Bezos, O'Brien and Fain are doing the same for Elon Musk and the Republicans today. And this is a dead end. The political parties of the bosses do not offer a way forward for American workers, and we will be forced to pay the cost of these tariffs. The history of the labor movement is international. The counterpoint to this America First nonsense is, why are our international unions why weren't they organizing auto workers in Mexico when after the automakers got bailed out following the recession and said, man, we got all this money, we're going to throw it into developing factories in Mexico? Why didn't you go fucking organize them? Why are you instead saying, look at those guys, they're taking our jobs, they're driving down our wages? That's because you won't fucking organize them. Why do our union leaders pull punches so as not to challenge or embarrass the political establishment? Like working with Biden, as O'Brien did, to break the rail strike. Our Tax Amazon fight worked in the exact opposite direction of that. We organized independently from the Democrats, rallying workers, young people, renters, union members to challenge and expose anyone who sided with big business through our action conferences and protests. We're not going to run cover for you while you betray working people. We're not going to subordinate working people's needs to your political career. And despite the quisling efforts of Democrats and labor fakers, we won a tax on Amazon and big business to the tune of over $200 million a year. And so that's, I think when it's like, how are we going to win things? I think that we have lessons here, we have experience here of fighting and winning. We have a track record. And because it came up in the breakout discussion I was in, may not have come up in all of them, but I think there's been a lot of discussion around how, when we're presented with crisis after crisis and an absence of leadership and a clear approach on a fight back, that people say, how do we help one another within our community? And there's a lot of talk about mutual aid. And hopefully I'm not being too sharp here, but mutual aid, in my opinion, absent class struggle, it's just collectivized charity. We cannot address our needs with our already meager material resources. We can't rob from Peter to pay Paul. That doesn't work. What's needed is a political struggle to take what we need back from the billionaires who stole it from us. And there's a historical precedent for this. The origins of my own union began with mutual aid. The Bridgman's Mutual Association was formed by ironworkers, who at the time, that was the most dangerous job in the country, to pool funds so that workers killed on the job would have their funeral costs paid for, with some money for the wife and children left behind. But this did nothing to address the unabated construction fatalities or the poverty wages of my forebears. And it wasn't until workers began militant organizing drives and successfully unionized that pay and conditions improved. Because this did change the balance of power between the workers and their bosses. So I want to thank you all for showing up today, but it would be negligent to just leave it at that. Today is not enough. Everyone in this room has a job to do in the struggles ahead. And every single one of you, I'm looking at you with the shawl, you guy in the white shirt back there, every single fucking one of you, you fucking matter and you can do shit. After our breakout group, there was a healthcare worker who asked me about, how do I organize, it's fucked, right? In healthcare, it's fucked. How do I, with my coworkers, like there's nothing left. And that's your workplace is political. Your workplace is where you organize. And if you don't have a union, then the best thing for someone who wants to start a union is to organize with your coworkers, to start acting like a union. And that's when we talk about concretely organizing, is to see yourself not as someone that things happen to, but someone who takes action, someone who realizes that there are daily conditions that are unacceptable. That's the conditions of all of us. And if you talk to any one of us, chances are you're going to find that common ground. And that's the basis on which we can get organized. And that's what I think tomorrow with Workers Strike Back around a Fight the Rich campaign that crystallizes, it makes concrete how we can address those things. And then it's up to us as individuals to go back, not to be like, I went to the conference, it was great, back to regular, right? It's to go into our workplace, into our communities, into our unions, and have those conversations and bring them to the next meeting. Every single one of us needs to organize in our apartment buildings, workplaces, unions, communities for mass actions, including protests, occupations, and strikes. Obviously, we build up to those things, but we shouldn't be embarrassed about the strategy of our struggle. And I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be easy. Respect to Brother King, but there's no arc of a moral universe that bends toward justice. There is only class war, the outcome of which will be decided by whether or not regular people like us wage the necessary struggle to fight back. So I would appeal to everyone here to join Worker Strike Back if you're not already a member. Let's learn from our proud history of class struggle, and let's make full use of our being here in this room, and let's get organized today to fight for tomorrow. Solidarity.
My name is Gray Martin. I am a healthcare worker and a rank-and-file member of Washington Federal State Employees Union Local 3488. The billionaire in the White House, Donald Trump, along with Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, are currently carrying out an anti-worker blitz across the federal government. Roughly 75,000 federal workers have taken a buyout that Trump and Musk have offered to get them to leave against the advice of our unions, and over 10,000 federal workers have already been fired by this administration. This equals about 3% of the 2.3 million person civilian workforce. Trump and Musk cuts to government agencies and programs aren't about targeting fraud or waste. It's an attack on workers and our meager protections, including cuts at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Hospitals and trauma centers like my own are largely funded through Medicare and Medicaid, which provides necessary health care for millions of Americans. These cuts are making the already barbaric healthcare system in this country even worse. Meanwhile, the Democrats have done nothing to fight back. In fact, many of them have joined in on Trump's attacks. This is after Democrats paved the way for Trump's victory in the first place, with their betrayals and attacks on working people. Democrats broke the railroad workers' strike. They failed to fight for a $15 minimum wage. They've refused to fight for Medicare for all, and they spent billions to fund the genocide in Gaza. It's that endless barrage of attacks and betrayals that has brought us to this point. Workers keep the economy and government running, not the billionaire class, which exploits our labor to make their profit. Workers' power lies in being organized, willing to strike and to withhold our labor. The threat of strike action is our most important weapon to force these billionaire-backed parties and wealthy elite to act, and to secure victories for the working class. In 2019, during Trump's government shutdown, unionized air traffic controllers and flight attendants threatened strike action that forced Trump to end the shutdown within hours of the strike being called. Federal workers can stop Trump's anti-worker attacks and fight for more, including real raises to make up for years of massive inflation. We need to go on the offensive with a fighting strategy for what workers need, including a renewed fight for Medicare for all, including ballot initiatives for public health care at the local and state level. And we cannot rely on the failed strategy of the vast majority of the union leadership who endorsed the strikebreakers Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris. We have to rebuild a fighting labor movement, which means rejecting the approach of the business unionist leaders, including the heads of the federal government unions like my union, AFSCME, who have failed to organize strike action in response to Trump's attacks. We need a class struggle approach, and that requires reckoning inside the labor movement and the building up of a new, militant, rank-and-file leadership, including a socialist leadership that understands that we need to break with capitalism itself. Coordinated mass strike action led by the rank and file is needed that can disrupt business as usual. It will require support from the rest of the labor movement and all working people independent of either major political party. We must take lessons from history in order to move forward. It wasn't the Democrats or Republicans that granted us civil rights, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the end of racial segregation. It was mass movements of workers conducting mass civil disobedience. The anti-war movement of the 1960s and 70s, along with the combined power of the labor and civil rights movements, brought about the end of the Vietnam War under conservative and reactionary President Nixon. It was the militant rank-and-file Teamsters and auto workers of the 1930s, led by socialists, whose victories led to an explosive growth in the labor movement. Breaking away with the conservative union leadership at the time, they organized using a class struggle approach and carried out collective strike action that effectively shut down the city of Minneapolis in 1934. By disturbing business as usual and fighting for union recognition with over 3,000 members collectively taking strike action, workers won their demands for a 40-hour work week, overtime pay, and wage increases. Working people cannot rely on the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or the business unionist leaders to end the wars, to create a living wage, or fight back against these coming attacks from the Trump administration. The Biden administration provided billions of dollars in military aid to Israel, ignoring international humanitarian laws and prioritizing a government committing a live-stream genocide over the needs of families in California who suffered wildfires. Shame. The Biden administration and Democrats made it illegal for railroad workers to go on a national strike, siding with executives, over 100,000 workers, fighting for paid sick time and better working conditions. Shame. The Democratic Party abandoned their promise to increase the federal minimum wage or codify Roe v. Wade into law. It was mass movements led by Socialist Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant against the Democrats that led to the first $15 minimum wage in a major city, which is now $20.75 an hour. Under fighting socialist leadership, working people also won renters' rights, including the winter eviction moratorium, the first anti-caste discrimination law outside of South Asia, turning Seattle into an abortion sanctuary city with free abortion for all, and the second city in the U.S. to pass a ceasefire resolution in solidarity with Palestinians amidst the genocidal war on Gaza. We cannot allow the Democrats to pose as the resistance against Trump. And we cannot allow sellouts like Bernie Sanders to lead working people back into the billionaire-backed party that financed a genocide. Shame indeed, while they attacked the free speech of anti-war activists in our schools and workplaces, only now are they willing to criticize the Israeli government. They financed this genocide. They do not deserve our support. They are not the resistance to what is happening. There is no reforming this capitalist party hell-bent on imperialism and war. A union is the best tool and protection that a worker has of being engaged in struggle to fight for change in the workplace and in the country as a whole. Worker Strike Back members have successfully filed union resolutions in their unions, rallied support for Amazon workers fighting to unionize in various facilities, and we need to build a powerful movement to fight for what we need, including Medicare for all, and an end to Trump's anti-worker attacks and good union jobs for all. Thank you. Thank you. I encourage you to join us at Workers Strike Back. Join the movement. Fight the rich in their two parties. When we fight, when we fight, when we fight, solidarity.
Yeah, my name is Justin Smeltzer, and I'm a member of UAW Local 974, and I work as an industrial electrician at Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois, or Central Illinois. I joined Workers Strike Back when I came across it about a year ago. The organization and people involved in it stood out to me as an organization that can make real lasting change. The fighting spirit that I saw in Workers Strike Back led me to getting involved and taking up a task that Workers Strike Back was working on to organize rank and file workers in unions to pass resolutions in their unions to rescind the undemocratic endorsement of Kamala Harris by union leaderships around the country. I fought for this demand, and I had a shop floor conversations with my fellow coworkers to point out the hypocritical nature of the union leadership's undemocratic endorsement of Harris, which was done without discussion or vote by the members of UAW. Harris was backing the genocide in Gaza to the hilt, which UAW rank and file firmly opposed. This opposition among the rank and file led to President Shawn Fain, the UAW International, calling for an arms embargo. But Shawn Fain turned around and uncritically endorsed Biden and then Harris without any democratic vote by membership of UAW. We faced total opposition from our union leadership when we brought this resolution forward to the local and was unable to pass in UAW. But it was a vital tool for talking to my coworkers and including coworkers who did agree on these points, but they told me that they would be supporting Trump. This is a perfect illustration of how the attacks by Democrats have led to the election of Trump. And I've recently worked alongside other members of Workers Strike Back to draft a model resolution that calls for labor leaders and unions to organize national days of action, including mass protest and strike action to stop mass deportations. I've been organizing for this resolution to pass through UAW, and I have successfully gotten a resolution passed at the January membership meeting of the UAW Reform Caucus, Unite All Workers for Democracy, or UAWD. And this resolution calls on the rank and file workers across UAW and other unions to bring the similar resolution to their locals and demand that the labor leaders stand on the principle that an injury to one is an injury to all. I'm deeply disturbed that we have heard nothing from UAW leaders about Trump's mass deportations and his other anti-worker policies. UAW leadership has also been silent on the rising layoffs in the auto industry over the past few years, and it does not seem to be slowing down anytime soon. During the presidential campaigns, Shawn Fain called Trump a scab and told workers to vote for Harris, despite Biden and Harris administration's role in breaking the railroad worker strike. But now he's shamefully said he'll work with Trump. Shawn Fain has built some credit among a section of UAW members because he won them a wage increase in 2023 when he carried out the stand-up strike at the Big Three automakers. However, the method of the stand-up strike, which consists of some factories going on strike while others continue production, left open major factories at the Big Three that produce the most popular vehicles. Much more could have been won by the Big Three strike if all workers had been out on strike at every factory and they all went on strike at once, shutting down the boss's profits. In fact, several workers' demands, including the shortening of the work week from 30 hours of work to 40 hours of pay, was left off the final agreement, and due to the strategy employed by the union leadership and not applying the full pressure of all workers going out on strike. These examples of the stand-up strike and the response to Gaza and deportations are rotten method of labor leadership that we refer to as business unionism, where labor leaders will claim to fight for workers while simultaneously wanting to not hurt the boss's profits, Democrats' chances to win elections. This ultimately helps the ruling class and is bad for working class people because their interests are diametrically opposed to the interests of the bosses. For this reason, the labor movement's rank and file needs to expose the failures of the leadership and organize mass pressure on the labor leaders to fight Trump, the Democrats, and the bosses. We need to be organizing independent mass strike action, mass protests, and mass civil disobedience if we intend to be an effective fight back to win. This independent organizing should be intimately linked with the building of a new independent working class party led by the rank and file of the union, demanding the union leadership break from the Democrats and other capitalist parties and form this new working class party. One that is accountable to the workers themselves and not corporations that our unions are designed to fight against. I call on each of you to join Workers Strike Back and get involved because we need you in the fight. We need a militant rank and file workers movement to take the reins back from the rotten approach of conservative labor leaders as we workers are exploited for our labor by the capitalists, and we need to organize to shut down the profits and cause an extreme disruption to their system to win our demands. And when we fight, we can win.
So Shama spoke earlier about our fight to win the $15 minimum wage. How we were able to defeat big business and the Democrats to win the highest minimum wage in the country. We knew when we won our victory that the fight wasn't over. And Kshama said as much in her victory speech. We knew because no fight is ever over under capitalism. The bosses and their political servants will pick their moment to go after that victory, to try to undermine it or get rid of it altogether. And we're seeing that again right now, as the Republicans and Trump are preparing to go after Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, some of the biggest victories of the US working class, with the help of the Democrats. This is one of the many reasons that capitalism cannot be reformed, that it has to be destroyed. Our victory on 15, though it was and is the strongest minimum wage law in the country, was incomplete. We weren't strong enough to win everything we were fighting for. In any fight with the bosses, whether we win, how much we win, is not about the morality of the bosses or the politicians or making persuasive arguments to them, because they have no morality. It comes down purely to the strength of our movement and our support within the wider working class versus the bosses. That's all that it's about. So with the help of many labor leaders, sadly, the Democrats ran through a series of loopholes in the legislation. One of them was they gave small business a 10-year-long phase-in before they had to pay tipped workers the full minimum wage. That had problems written all over it. To be clear, this was not because big business or the Democrats give a shit about small business. Obviously they don't. As we knew at the time, this was a loophole that they hoped they could cash in on later as an avenue to undermine and to start to unravel the law. And predictably, last summer, the Democratic City Council members, with the Socialists no longer in the City Council, decided to do exactly that, to begin their assault on Seattle's historic and massively popular minimum wage. They were totally dishonest about it. Again, they said it was all about small business. They said it was all about COVID and how it was so hard on small business, how it was unexpected, despite the very obvious fact that it was workers who paid the price for the pandemic. They used identity politics. They had the sole black member of the City Council be the one to trot out this attack. Joy Hollingsworth is her name. And by the way, we should always name our enemies. We should use their names. We defeated them. We defeated them using the same strategy we have used in all of our fights. Because since no fight is ever over under capitalism, until we destroy it, that's what we have to do. We built a movement. We called a press conference. We organized an action conference. We mobilized to City Hall. We politically called them out, slammed them in the City Council chamber, including Hollingsworth explicitly. We exposed all of their lies. We said that any of them voting to dismantle 15 needed to be booted out of office. And we did win. And as of January 1st of this year, Seattle's minimum wage is $20.76 an hour. Obviously, it's still not enough. But we defeated big business and the Democratic Party again. We defeated them in their attempts to create a sub-minimum, permanent sub-minimum wage in this city and deny workers the more than $3 an hour raise that they needed to survive. We did that even without the benefit of a Seattle City Council. In addition to defending 15, our movement also just won an offensive victory. We campaigned for the Prop 1 ballot initiative, which expands our Amazon tax that we won in 2020 to fund affordable housing. We canvassed and tabled and answered the lies of the corporate media again. The NGOs that filed the ballot initiative, unfortunately, did not want to antagonize big business and the establishment, so the increase was only for $52 million a year. Our Amazon tax victory that we won in 2020 raised $450 million last year by itself. So while we disagree with those NGO leaders, it was nonetheless an important victory. And it shows, I think, very clearly the huge support there is for taxing the rich and big business right now. It shows the huge anger at Amazon, and it shows that we don't have to sit back and only carry out defensive fights. We can also go on the offensive and win. And we have beat Amazon, I've lost count now, I think 4 times. And so I think there is a space to bring a much stronger version of the Amazon tax initiative, both here and in other cities, because affordable housing is a crisis everywhere, as is the massive anger at the rich. I also wanted to make a couple of quick points about mutual aid. So I know there's a lot of discussion about mutual aid, and I basically agree with what Logan said earlier. It's completely understandable that people feel that they want to do something for the people that they know that are struggling, but the problem is we have limited resources, we have limited energy, and we can win offensive victories like these. We can make the billionaires pay rather than trying to struggle to, GoFundMes, et cetera, to try to get by. And that's really the best direction for our energies, not only because they're the ones with the billions and not us, which is the critical point, but also because in engaging in class struggle, people learn. That is how you build a movement, that's how you build an ongoing movement, and that's how you create leaders. It is through these fights, the $15 minimum wage fight, the tax Amazon fight, the fight for renters' rights that we fought. That is how we built leaders. That's how we built an organization. That's why we have Workers' Strike Back right now. That's why we're having this conference right now. And so we need to build on that. It's very easy for us to get dispersed and go in different directions and do different things and get tied up with the many people struggling under this system. But the way people learn is through struggle. And so it's absolutely crucial that our orientation be towards strategically taking on fights where we can do real damage to the bosses, where sometimes we can win, and where we can build a stronger movement going forward rather than constantly being on the defensive.
I really like what Calvin said in his speech before about offensive fights and defensive fights. The theme of this conference has been to fight the rich. And to fight the rich, we do need to fight defensive fights. Like, when Trump is firing civil servants, we need to protest it. But that's not enough. We need to go beyond that. Higher minimum wage, Medicare for all, free public transit, ending caste discrimination, issues like that. We need to win concrete victories like that, material gains, starting with the local level and then going on to the national level. And we have a great example of how to win such victories over the past decade right here in Seattle. And in fact, I'm here to talk about precisely one of them. Exactly 2 years ago, February 21st, 2023, the Seattle City Council banned caste discrimination in the city. And Seattle became the first jurisdiction outside South Asia to do so. Media coverage of this was viral. The news just became viral. You can hear Shama talking about socialism and tax the rich and things like that in various Indian languages like Hindi and Marathi. The governor of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin, tweeted his congratulations. It was so big. And that was incidentally probably the first time in history that someone named Stalin was congratulating a Trotskyist. Caste is a system of oppression that's hierarchical and based on birth, and it divides people into these rigid groups, with groups at the lower tiers facing severe oppression and even violence. And this, even though it's 2,000 years old, it continues to this day in India. It's a fundamental fault line of Indian society, being a major factor behind the rise of the right wing. So it's not just some arcane, old, irrelevant issue, right? It's very current, very relevant even today. And caste exists not just in India, but it exists among the diaspora here. I am a tech worker, I work at Microsoft, and I have seen caste play out myself in Microsoft. There were internal Microsoft emails, which were in fact published by the Washington Post a few years ago, where there were casteist comments being made by some employees against others who are caste oppressed, called Dalits, and questioning their intelligence, work ethics, and so on. And no one was ever held accountable for it. And there are many other examples like that. We collected them as part of our movement of caste discrimination that's present in the US. And the fact that it's so relevant today, is what makes the victory significant. The opposition to our movement was bipartisan, and that's been a theme of all the talks today. We had the Hindu right wing, and like I said, caste is a real trigger point for the Hindu right wing. And that's a point that's often not very well understood, because the public image of the Hindu right wing is they are Islamophobic, which is true, but they're also casteist, right? You know, when it comes to defending the billionaires, they try every method. So the Hindu right wing was majorly opposed to us. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which is one of the biggest, most prominent right-wing organizations in India, the US chapter, and they're closely aligned with the Narendra Modi administration. They opposed the ordinance. And the Democrats were not much better. And the clearest example of it was when the fight for caste went from Seattle to California, where the governor of California ultimately vetoed the bill unilaterally. It was a unilateral decision. There was no pressure from anyone. But even in Seattle, right, it's not like the city council Democrats voted for us because of the kindness of their hearts. It took a strong movement and a lot of pressure to make them vote for it. Incidentally, the Modi administration, because of victories like the caste victory, they're rewarding our campaign by denying Shama a visa to visit her family in India. It's an act that's so outrageous that it's received considerable media attention in the past few weeks. Denial of visas is a favorite weapon of the Modi administration to crush dissent among the diaspora. There are plenty of Sikh Americans who get denied visas for being critical of the Indian government. It's even prompted the Human Rights Watch to issue a report. Like in the case of the caste issue, the Democrats are happy to play along, and they're just paving the way for it. Representative Adam Smith, who is a member of the American Sikh caucus, has done nothing on this issue, right? Shame. You know what he's busy doing? He's busy supporting Israel in the genocidal frenzy. He's also very happy to describe anti-war voices as left-wing fascists. Yeah, that's actually true. You can Google that. He did do that. He's disgusting enough to do that. Anyway, we're going to be organizing a rally to protest against Adam Smith on connecting his support for Israel and his silence and complicity with the Modi administration and the denial of visas exactly 1 month from now. March 22nd, that's also a Saturday, and it's going to be at noon. There's flyers describing this event that are being circulated, so please show up and show your support. Back to the caste victory. Our coalition was broad, and this goes to the theme of internationalism that Emily stated. We had anti-caste groups, we had socialists, we had labor unions, we had other South Asian groups like Muslim and Sikh groups as well. There was a very broad coalition that was needed to put pressure on the city council Democrats to vote for us. And this reflected an understanding in the movement, and this goes to the worker strike back theme, right? That all oppressions are linked, and that the fight against them, therefore, should also be linked. One thing I do want to call out, and this was a point that has come up in earlier speeches as well, is about identity politics. And just to be clear what I mean and what I don't mean, right? The particular fight here was against caste oppression, and caste is an identity marker. So we need to be clear that we're not saying that we shouldn't be fighting such things, fighting caste oppression, and the George Floyd protests were inspiring, great. But there are tendencies within movements where these identity-based markers tend to warp decision-making, and they affect movements badly. And those kinds of tendencies we have to be opposed to. And there were examples of that in the caste movement itself. I'll just pick one example. There were anti-caste groups within our coalition who felt that we shouldn't have a movement-based offensive kind of an approach. They felt that we should talk to the city council members kind of one by one in back-channel negotiations and kind of slowly nudge them to support what we want. We decided that kind of approach is not going to work. In fact, there was other parts of a movement where the principle was follow Dalit leadership, right? So if we had blindly taken that up and followed that, we wouldn't have built a strong movement. And who knows, we might even have lost, right? We might not have won. So that is the kind of identity politics that we have to guard against, and that we did guard against in the Seattle victory. Incidentally, I mentioned the California thing where Governor Newsom vetoed the bill. But it's interesting to look at what the background to that was. So after the Seattle victory, the movement spread. There was a desire to fight caste oppression across the country. And California was the biggest example where that happened. What happened was that the organizers there kind of fell back to their back channel based approach. They didn't emphasize the movement too much. In fact, they went to the extent of saying that Shama shouldn't be there because she's going to talk about socialism, and that might upset the Democrats who they were recruiting. And that might be too extreme, apparently. And that hurt the movement badly, right? That kind of approach, that kind of attitude hurt the movement. And it was an uphill fight. So even if we had built a strong movement, it would have taken a massive fight, but we would have given ourselves a much better chance to win. Instead, what the activists there actually did, their approach kind of paved the way for the governor to ultimately veto, right? So that's a massive lesson that we have from the caste fight. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we advance get into our future fights, including on the caste issue. But going back to what Calvin said, which I really liked, the victory against caste discrimination, like the one for Tax Amazon, like the one for 15 Now, were all examples of offensive approach. And it almost feels like we've had so many such victories. So no, this requires a lot of skill and a lot of dedication and commitment to that particular approach that results in this, because there are many failures too. And not just in California. I mentioned the California case, but I've actually seen failures in Seattle itself. And even Shama has seen some of those, where a reluctance to use this approach resulted in defeats. So this approach is hard-learned and takes the kind of sophisticated analysis that Workers' Strike Back brings to the picture. And that's what it's going to take to fight the rich. Solidarity.
Yeah, so I'm Willow. I work as a therapist in a community mental health agency unionized with SEIU in the Boston area. I love the work that I do, and I love my clients, but I see firsthand every day the impact of this rotten capitalist system on mental health. And while many of my colleagues feel burnt out and demoralized by our extremely limited abilities to improve the lives of those that we serve, I am grateful for the clarity and hope provided through my membership in Workers' Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers. It's important and entirely necessary that we are here together as working people, union and non-union, as forces on the left, to discuss the way forward to build a united, militant, working class movement to fight the rich and both their parties. People are increasingly drawing the conclusion that both parties are for big business and the rich, that our needs are diametrically opposed to theirs, and that we cannot reform the Democratic Party. That Donald Trump, while he may have won some people over with his promises to bring down inflation and end the war on Gaza, is ultimately beholden to the rich and going on the offensive against workers and youth, and is calling for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is trying to suck his former supporters back into the fold of the billionaire-backed Democratic Party by talking about Medicare for all after having squandered every opportunity to fight for it. AOC and the squad try to pose as leaders of the resistance to Trump. Labor leaders are promising to work with the Trump administration rather than leading the charge against his anti-worker right-wing agenda. But in stark contrast, we are here, clear-eyed, discussing a way forward, and we need to make that count. We must oppose Trump and the right wing, but opposing Trump and the right wing is not enough. We need to build the kind of movement that can win historic victories for working people that clearly demonstrate the strategy needed. We need to launch bold campaigns to fight for expanded Medicare for all, social housing, free transit, a living wage, and an end to deportations of immigrants, war and occupation, and attacks on trans people and other oppressed communities. We need to unionize Amazon. And as someone who joined Workers Strike Back just this morning said, we need to kick Jeff Bezos in the proverbial teeth. We need to defeat Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and all their billionaire cronies. While the Democrats move further and further to the right, including many Democrats in Congress joining in on Trump's attacks, we need to provide a clear alternative to overcome the divide and rule strategies of the ruling class. We need to build a new mass anti-war working class party, a party that includes Workers Strike Back, the Green Party, Abandon Harris, and other organizations. What's it going to take to build a new party for working people? And what kind of party do we need? We need a party that has a fighting strategy to win what workers need. Medicare for all, taxing Amazon and big business to fund social housing, free mass transit, ending all military funding for the Israeli state and the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, unionizing Amazon in every workplace, and bringing down Trump, the billionaires, and both their parties. That is the program of our proposed Fight the Rich campaign. We need a party that has fighting leadership, with a track record of building effective movements, of taking on big business, taking on the Democratic and Republican parties, and winning. We won't win by just running a lot of candidates for office, and we don't have the capacity to do that. We need to concentrate our forces to wage effective class struggle campaigns, which could include running a few strong leaders in key elections. But a working class party has to do more than run elections. We need a party that will lead mass movements, militant protest action, mass civil disobedience, coordinated mass strikes to take on the power of big business. We need a party that will disrupt business as usual and use every tool at our disposal to win our demands. We shouldn't see this as launching just another third party to give more choices on the ballot during elections. We need to bring together the forces of the working class and the left to build the kind of mass party that can push aside the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the bosses, and ultimately their entire system. In 1854, the Republican Party, which at that time was a new, radical anti-slavery party, was founded through a coming together of anti-slavery forces that had engaged in pitched battles against the expansion of slavery, including against major pro-slavery offenses like the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It was a coming together of those who had worked to build anti-slavery third parties in the previous decade, including the Liberty Party and the Free Soil Party, the abolitionist faction wing of the Whig Party, who correctly decided to abandon that party, just like working people are abandoning the Democratic and Republican parties today. We need that sort of coming together today, of the best fighters from the Green Party, of Abandon Harris, of the militant wing of the union movement, of principled socialists, of Workers Strike Back, revolutionary workers, and of the millions of working people that are not currently part of any organization or union. The anti-slavery Republican Party, when it was founded, didn't emerge out of thin air. It was born out of movements and concrete struggles. And that's what the Fight the Rich campaign and Workers Strike Back are all about. We need to take what we've discussed today and put it into action. Workers Strike Back is calling for a national day of action on March 22nd, protesting Congress members from both parties who have supported and fueled the genocide in Gaza and demanding an end to military funding of Israel. And we're proposing a follow-up organizing conference via Zoom in 3 months' time to discuss progress and next steps to fight the rich. Can I get a show of hands for who here is currently a member of Workers Strike Back? That's amazing. And who here has signed up today to become a Workers Strike Back member, or can pledge to become a member before you leave this conference. If you're watching online, become a member of Workers Strike Back right now. You can go to workerstrikeback.org/join and sign up to help build this fighting organization. Thank you all so much for being part of this movement. I hope to see all of you back tomorrow for our Workers Strike Back convention, where we'll hear more about work happening around the country, discuss the Fight the Rich campaign and our priorities, and vote on democratic structures and leadership to build Workers Strike Back into the strongest possible fighting force with chapters around the country. Real quick, who's our enemy? Who's our enemy? Thank you, in solidarity.